It was a normal Tuesday morning when I arrived at the airport, dressed in my usual sharp suit, confident and ready for the business trip that was about to change everything. The line at check-in was short, and I breezed through the process, eager to settle into my first-class seat and relax during the flight. The usual routine, the quick security check, the long walk to the gate, the predictable calm before takeoff, but this time, something felt off. When I approached the desk, I handed my boarding pass to the woman behind the counter. She scanned it, then looked at me, a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "Sir, we seem to have a problem," she said, her voice stiff and formal. I tilted my head, perplexed. "A problem? I have a confirmed first-class ticket." She glanced at her screen again, then back at me, her face now flushed. "I'm sorry, but you've been assigned to a different seat, not first class." I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't a minor error. First class was where I always sat, it was the norm for my travels, the space where I could be comfortable, away from the noise and chaos of the cabin. "I don't think you understand. My ticket clearly shows first class. Please check again." The tension in the air was palpable, and despite her attempt to maintain a calm demeanor, I could tell something wasn't right. She seemed flustered, but when she turned to the gate agent for backup, I could sense the unease spreading. I watched as the gate agent hesitated, as though weighing a decision, before speaking up. "We don't have any seats in first class available for you. You'll have to sit in economy." I felt a rush of confusion and anger bubbling up inside me. I've never been treated like this before. But I refused to let my emotions take over. Instead, I did what I always did, I stayed calm, composed. "Let me speak to someone higher up," I insisted. I could tell that the exchange was making others in line uncomfortable, their eyes flicking between us. I could feel the weight of judgment in the air, but I wasn't about to back down. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not now, not after everything I'd built. I turned to the gate agent and gave them a cold, firm stare. "Get your manager," I said. The agent hesitated, clearly uncertain, before nodding and stepping away. The waiting area had become unnervingly quiet. Passengers around me were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, whispering under their breath, and I knew they were all watching. A CEO, someone used to being treated with respect and professionalism, standing here, fighting for what was rightfully mine. It was almost too surreal. A few moments later, a man in a suit appeared. He had the look of someone who had been summoned to deal with a problem. He was tall, wearing a dark gray blazer and carrying himself with the air of someone used to handling situations just like this. He extended his hand with a forced smile. "I'm Daniel, the manager on duty today. I understand there's been a mix-up." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I looked him straight in the eyes. "There's no mix-up. I have a confirmed first-class seat. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not going to sit in economy." He glanced at the gate agent, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Then he turned back to me. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. We don't have any first-class seats available." I could feel the tension rising, the thin layer of control I had maintained slowly starting to slip. "You're telling me that despite having a first-class ticket, despite my status, there's no seat available for me?" He looked uncomfortable but didn't back down. "It's the system, sir. We don't have anything available at this time." I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about principle. This was about showing them that treating someone like me, anyone, like this was unacceptable. And if they thought I would simply walk away and accept this, they were terribly wrong. Without a word, I pulled out my phone, swiping across the screen to dial a number. As I held the phone to my ear, I looked at Daniel, the gate agent, and the growing number of passengers who were now watching. Their eyes were all on me. I could feel the heat of their curiosity, their judgment, but I wasn't going to falter. The phone rang. I didn't speak, just waited for the line to pick up. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and unmistakably powerful. What's going on? The voice asked. It was someone I knew well, someone who could get things done. I'm at the airport. I'm being denied my seat, I replied, my voice steady but firm. I need you to call the head of operations here and have this resolved. Now. The line was quiet for a moment, but I could hear the rustling as they began to make moves. I looked at Daniel again, making sure he understood the weight of what was happening. I had just made a call that would change the course of the situation. The phone call felt like an eternity, though it was only a few moments before I heard the voice on the other end click back to me. It's done, they said, the certainty in their tone making it clear that they had already taken the necessary steps. I ended the call and looked up at Daniel. He was still standing there, eyes flicking nervously between me and the growing crowd of onlookers. It was almost as if he was waiting for a sign, a shift in power, something that would break the tension that had now fully settled over the airport. I raised an eyebrow. I suggest you get on the phone with someone in your operations team. Now. And I mean immediately. His face was a mix of confusion and frustration. Sir, I don't think you understand, I interrupted, my voice cool and collected but carrying weight. I've just spoken to the highest levels of your company. There's a problem here, and it's not going to go away just by pretending it doesn't exist. You're going to fix this, or I'm going to make sure this reaches the boardroom, and that could change everything for this airline. I knew the words hit harder than any confrontation could. I could see the wheels turning in Daniel's mind. He knew the stakes had just risen. His next move could either de-escalate the situation or send it spiraling into a corporate disaster. The passengers who had been watching now looked back and forth, some whispering quietly, sensing something monumental was about to unfold. Daniel turned sharply and walked toward a back office, his footsteps quick and purposeful. I didn't move. I stood my ground, taking a moment to glance around at the passengers. Many of them were still looking, some now pulling out their phones to discreetly film what was happening. Word of this moment would be everywhere in minutes. As I waited, I thought about how many times I had been underestimated, how often people had assumed that a black CEO like me could easily be brushed aside, that I would quietly accept the mistakes made by others. But not today. Not this time. Minutes passed, and I stood there, resolute. Finally, Daniel returned, his face pale, his body tense. He walked up to me slowly, holding out a new boarding pass. Sir, we've located your seat, he said, his voice now lacking the confidence it had moments earlier. First class. It's all set. I glanced at the boarding pass. The seat was confirmed. But I wasn't done yet. I'll board in a moment, I said, my voice calm, but there's something else I need you to do. I want an apology, publicly. His eyes widened, clearly caught off guard by the request. Sir, no excuses, I cut in. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for years, and I've never been treated like this. I expect a public apology. Not just to me, but to everyone who saw this today. Do I make myself clear? He stood there, silent for a moment. I could tell he was weighing his options. The airline couldn't afford this type of negative press. And yet, he had to admit, this wasn't just a minor mistake. It was a serious misstep, one that could have larger consequences. The silence that followed my demand felt like a slow burn, stretching out longer than either of us would have preferred. Daniel, still processing the weight of the situation, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. He didn't want to be here, didn't want to deal with me any longer. But there was no turning back now. I could see the internal battle happening in his mind, the conflict between doing what was right and protecting the image of the airline. His eyes flicked to the other passengers who were still watching us, their attention now fully fixed on the drama unfolding. I could feel their anticipation. They were waiting for him to either back down or step up. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping as if he had just come to terms with the inevitable. He looked me in the eye, his voice quieter but firm. All right. I'll arrange for the apology. Right here, in front of everyone. Without another word, he walked over to the podium by the gate and grabbed the microphone. The terminal, which had been buzzing with quiet murmurs, grew still. I could feel the tension in the air as everyone turned to look. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice now amplified throughout the terminal. "We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience and confusion caused today with the seating situation. It was a mistake on our part, and we take full responsibility. To the passenger involved, we deeply regret the oversight and are ensuring this will never happen again. Your experience today is not one we ever wish for any of our valued customers." There it was, a public acknowledgement of what had happened. I could see the weight of the apology land, not just on me, but on everyone in the room. It wasn't enough to undo the discomfort and humiliation, but it was a step toward resolution. For a brief moment, I could feel a shift in the air. The tension that had been suffocating the terminal lifted slightly, though the unspoken truth remained: something had broken that couldn't easily be fixed. Daniel returned to me, looking slightly relieved, but there was no mistaking the exhaustion in his eyes. "We've also upgraded you to our premium suite for the remainder of your travel," he said. "It's the least we can do to make things right." I nodded, not entirely satisfied but acknowledging the effort. "Thank you," I replied, my voice still calm, but the resolve that had gotten me through this ordeal was still very much present. As I prepared to board, I overheard whispers from some of the passengers who had witnessed the apology. Many of them were nodding in agreement, others voicing their disbelief that such a thing had happened at all. I knew this incident would be talked about for days, and not in the way the airline had hoped. I boarded the plane shortly after, settling into my seat, the quiet hum of the engine filling the cabin. The cabin crew was more attentive than usual, perhaps overly so, and I noticed the subtle looks they exchanged among themselves. I didn't mind, it was a reminder that sometimes, you have to fight for respect. But as the plane ascended into the sky, I couldn't help but think, how many others had been through this before? How many people had been quietly dismissed, brushed aside, and made to feel like they didn't belong? This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure that everyone who walked into that airport, everyone who sat in first class, or in any seat at all, knew that their worth was unquestionable. The plane was cruising now, the seatbelt signs dimming as the stewardess made her rounds, offering drinks. The soft hum of the engines blended with the muffled chatter of passengers, but in my mind, everything still felt sharp. The moment we had just passed through at the gate was more than just a travel inconvenience, it was a reminder of how fragile our perceptions of power and respect could be. I leaned back in my seat, taking a deep breath, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the public apology. The airline had done what was required, but I knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. I wasn't the only one who had witnessed this disgraceful scene, and the ripple effect was already beginning to spread. I was right. When I landed in my destination city, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Texts, emails, social media mentions, news outlets covering the story. Apparently, someone had filmed the confrontation at the gate, and now, it was everywhere. The video was being shared faster than wildfire. It wasn't just my name trending, the entire airline was under fire, and people were asking questions. But it wasn't just about the airline's reputation anymore. The incident had sparked a conversation about systemic issues, about how power and respect were distributed differently depending on the person standing in front of you. About the idea that a black CEO, like me, could be treated as less than, despite everything they had achieved. It was a moment in time that had brought these conversations to the forefront. I opened a text from my assistant, who had clearly been fielding calls all morning. "This is going viral. People are talking about how they've experienced similar situations. You're being asked to comment." I didn't need to be told twice. I knew that silence would only give way to further misunderstandings. This wasn't just about me. This was bigger than one person being treated unfairly. It was about changing the way these institutions viewed those who walked through their doors, who handed over their boarding passes with trust, with the belief that they would be treated with the same respect as anyone else. It was about accountability. I took a deep breath and called my PR team. Get me on the phone with the media. We need a statement, but more than that, we need to be leading this conversation. Let's make sure this doesn't die down. Let's amplify it. People are ready to listen, I said, my voice firm. The call with my PR team was brief, but effective. I had made it clear that this was no longer just a minor issue, it had become a movement, a turning point in how power, race, and privilege were discussed in the public sphere. I couldn't sit idly by while this moment passed. This was bigger than a single flight, a single airline, or even a single CEO. This was about challenging the norms, the unspoken biases, the way things were always done. I scheduled a press conference for later that afternoon. The media had already caught wind of the situation, and now, it was time for me to address it head-on. The room was packed when I walked in. Cameras flashed as I took my seat behind the podium, the weight of the moment settling in. I cleared my throat, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the sea of reporters before me. There was no turning back now. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice steady but carrying the weight of what had happened. I called this press conference today not just because of what occurred at the airport, but because what happened isn't just an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a system that, too often, fails to recognize the worth and dignity of those who don't fit into a narrow mold. The room fell silent. I could see the reporters shifting, eager for the next words. I was denied a seat in first class. A seat I had paid for, a seat that was confirmed, simply because of who I am. This wasn't a mix-up, as they initially tried to claim. This was a decision, conscious, intentional, and deeply rooted in biases that have existed far too long. It's about power, race, and who gets to occupy certain spaces, I continued. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I could feel the eyes of the reporters on me, but this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't falter. This was the moment to stand tall. The public apology they issued wasn't enough. It was a start, but this isn't just about an apology. It's about recognizing that every person, regardless of their race, their background, their status, deserves to be treated with the respect they've earned. The seat on that plane, the seat in that terminal, doesn't belong to anyone based on the color of their skin or their title. It's about a fundamental right to be treated equally. I could see the murmurs begin, some reporters nodding, others scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The message was landing, but I wasn't finished. I want this to be a lesson, I said, leaning forward slightly. A lesson that goes beyond the boundaries of an airline or a business. I want this to be a conversation that challenges all of us, whether we are leaders, employees, or everyday citizens. The systems in place that allow for this kind of treatment must be questioned. It's time we do better, not just for people like me, but for everyone. I took a deep breath, and the room stayed still. The weight of my words had struck a chord, but I knew this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was just beginning. The press conference didn't just make waves, it created a tidal wave. As the media outlets broadcasted my statement, the conversation spread like wildfire. Social media platforms exploded with responses, both supportive and critical. The hashtag #RespectTheSeat trended worldwide within hours. People from all walks of life shared their own stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or denied access because of assumptions made about who they were. The floodgates had opened. I spent the next few days giving interviews, speaking with advocacy groups, and meeting with various organizations that had reached out to offer support. The phone never stopped ringing. There was a palpable sense of momentum building, as though this one moment had lit a fuse that was now set to detonate the complacency that so often surrounded these issues. One particular call stood out to me. It was from an old friend of mine, a senior executive at another major airline. He was calling to congratulate me, but also to ask a question that weighed heavily on his mind. Listen, I've been in this industry for a long time. I know what you're doing is important, but I've got to ask, do you really think this is going to change anything? These things run deep, you know. It's bigger than just a couple of apologies and some viral headlines. I took a moment to think before responding. It's bigger than a few apologies, I agree. But it's a start. And change doesn't happen overnight. It's the conversations we start that matter, the pressure we put on these systems. What happened to me was a small example, but it represents something much larger. And as long as people keep speaking out, we'll continue to push forward. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I hear you. But don't expect everyone to play along. There will be resistance. Trust me. I knew that. Resistance had always been there. But that only made it more important to keep going, to keep pushing, to keep fighting for what was right. Meanwhile, the airline continued to deal with the fallout. The backlash had been far more intense than they had anticipated. Their public image had taken a hit, but what truly hurt them was how their customers, loyal customers, felt about the way they had treated me. People don't forget when they're treated unfairly. And they certainly don't forget when they see someone with power, someone who should have been treated with respect, being belittled in such a public way. Despite the pressure, I noticed something shifting. The airline began implementing new training for their staff, with a specific focus on unconscious bias and how to handle passengers with the utmost respect, regardless of their background or status. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. I could tell that the leadership team was scrambling, trying to regain control of the narrative. But for me, the message had already been made clear. The real change wasn't going to come from a single apology or even from the company itself, it would come from the people. From those who had experienced what I did, from those who saw the injustice and stood up for what was right. As the days passed, I received messages from people all over the world. Some were people of color, others were allies, and many were just regular folks who had never thought much about what it means to walk through the world with a target on your back. Now they saw it. And now they cared. Weeks passed, and the story of the airline incident continued to resonate with people. The hashtag respect the seat remained a prominent topic in discussions about inequality, and the ripple effects were beginning to show in subtle yet powerful ways. It was clear that the narrative had shifted. People weren't just talking about an isolated incident anymore, they were talking about the broader issue of systemic biases and the need for accountability in every facet of life, from the corporate world to the airport terminals. I was invited to speak at several conferences and panels about the power of standing up for yourself and demanding equality. The conversations were no longer just about one person being denied a seat on an airplane, but about what we could do collectively to demand change. The discussions I had with business leaders, activists, and influencers were eye-opening. There was a shared understanding that this wasn't just a black issue, a race issue, it was a human issue. The consequences of discrimination affected us all, even if we didn't always see it. In my private life, however, things were quieter. While I was grateful for the opportunities to make a difference, I found myself reflecting more and more on how this moment had changed my perspective. This wasn't about being an individual leader anymore, it was about a collective leadership, a responsibility to make sure others had the same platform to be heard. I was no longer just fighting for my own place at the table, but for the seat at the table of others who had been silenced for far too long. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Daniel, the airline manager I'd dealt with at the airport. His voice was a little different than before, softer, more humble. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything you did, he began. I know it's a little late to say this, but you made me realize a lot about how I handle situations, how I view things. I was part of the problem. And I can see that now. I hadn't expected this call, but hearing him acknowledge his role in all of this meant more than I could put into words. It's never too late to do better, I replied. We all have our moments, but what matters is what we do with them. You have the power to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, not just here, but anywhere. He promised that he would be working with others in the company to ensure that there were real changes in how the airline treated all its passengers moving forward, and that his focus would be on educating staff about bias and the importance of respect in all interactions. The conversation was brief, but it was a turning point. Not just for him, but for me as well. It was a reminder that change wasn't about confrontation alone, it was about growth. Sometimes, the most important work happens in moments of self-reflection, when people are willing to admit their mistakes and commit to doing better. As I sat back in my office later that day, reflecting on everything that had unfolded, I realized that this had been the catalyst for something far larger than any one person or company. This moment of injustice, this small act of defiance, had sparked a fire that was now igniting conversations, pushing boundaries, and forcing the world to see things in a new light. But it wasn't just the world that was changing, it was me, too. I had always believed in leadership, in the power of influence. But now, I realized that leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about creating spaces where others could lead, where their voices could be heard, and where the system itself could be challenged and redefined. And as I looked at the new horizons ahead of me, I knew that the real work was just beginning. Months had passed since the incident at the airport, but the impact continued to echo throughout my career and the lives of many others. The media coverage had faded, the hashtags had stopped trending, but the conversation about fairness, equality, and respect was just beginning to take root in places it had never been before. I had become a symbol for something larger than myself. People who had once felt invisible now found a voice through my story. The airline, while initially shaken, had committed to lasting changes, implementing mandatory bias training and revising policies across the board to ensure that no passenger, no matter who they were, would ever be made to feel less than. More importantly, the way people viewed power, what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to hold space, began to shift. I was invited to speak at colleges, businesses, and organizations about leadership, inclusion, and the responsibility we all shared in making the world a more equitable place. But this wasn't just about corporate change, it was about personal transformation. During these months, I had learned that change starts not just in the boardroom, but in each of us. It starts with challenging our assumptions, stepping up when it's uncomfortable, and most importantly, lifting others up along the way. And that was exactly what I set out to do. I partnered with advocacy groups focused on elevating underrepresented voices in corporate spaces, ensuring that the next generation of leaders would have access to opportunities that had once been denied to them. I established mentorship programs, offering my time and resources to young professionals who had faced similar struggles. I knew how important it was for these young people to have someone in their corner, someone who had walked the path and was now ready to help others rise. As I looked back on the events that had led to this moment, being denied a seat, the public apology, the media storm, I realized that what had seemed like a personal setback had actually been a powerful catalyst for the change I had always wanted to see in the world. The incident, while frustrating at the time, had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, both about the systems that existed and about myself. I had been pushed to not just demand a seat at the table, but to create a table where others could sit as well. And as I sat in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I understood that the work I had started wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. The story of that day at the airport wasn't just about one man's fight for fairness. It was about a collective stand. A stand for every person who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. A stand for every passenger who had been told that they didn't belong in a certain space. A stand for a future where everyone could walk through the doors of any building, sit in any seat, and know that they belonged. That was the legacy I would leave behind.